really happy to hand it over to Barbara.
And good morning, everyone. Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure to be with you here this morning. As Laura said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about mental health in the context of the current situation. I'm not an expert on this. Like all of the rest of us, we are learning every day about how to handle this situation. So I hope very much this will be a way of us sharing our thinking around this. To give you a little bit of background on myself, I'm a managing director here at Accenture, and my work involves researching everything to do with workplace culture, so how you create environments where everyone can thrive. And as part of that, I've got more involved in our mental health story. And about 5 to 6 years ago, I set up the mental health program here at Accenture with a number of colleagues of mine. And I did that because I ended up with two really challenging situations, one personal and one from work. My personal one is my younger daughter, Jess. She has OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, which back in her late teens became a really, really serious problem for her and indeed for the family. And around the same time as her condition was getting worse, I also ended up taking care of a colleague when we were traveling who had a psychotic episode. And in both those situations, both with Jess and with my colleague, I suddenly realized that, first of all, their utter fear of talking about mental health at all, about sharing what was going on in their minds, and therefore holding back from seeking the help they both so badly needed. But also the fact that I had absolutely no clue what to do. I just didn't know how to help and felt myself very, very vulnerable and quite scared, not knowing the right thing. So I came away from those experiences, again, chatting to some colleagues of mine. And the program we put together really had two aims in mind. One was to make it safe for everyone to talk about mental health in our workplace. And secondly, that everyone would know where to go for help. So that's a bit of background about me and why I've got so interested in mental health. But I'd love to get you to know you a little bit today. It's incredibly difficult on a call like this to really kind of understand who people are and what they do. So I wanted to use a tiny bit of Mentimeter. And if you use your phones or your laptops, you can go to www.menti.com and just put in the access code 958847. And I just want to know where you are today. Where are you sitting? And we'll share a little bit about that on the screen in a second. I'm sitting in a place called Albury, a village called Albury, which is in Hertfordshire. And if any of you watched the programme of The Quiz that was on recently about the coughing major who reportedly cheated in the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire show, that was set in our village. And that picture that you can see on the screen there is the local school where they set quite a bit of the movie. But let's have a look at where you are today. Let me just see if we can get menti.com up. Let's have a look at that. I love seeing where people are. So there's me in Albury, East London, Bedfordshire, West Sussex, Lichfield, Glasgow, Billericay, Harrow, Haywards Heath, Indiana. That's amazing. It must be really early or really late in Indiana. Horsham, literally, we are individuals right around the country who've come together this morning, as Laura says, to talk about these issues and to try and see if we can understand how to support each other a bit better, even in these really, really tricky times. You can keep going with that. I'm going to switch back to the main screen for a minute. I'm going to switch back to the main screen in a minute. Why won't it let me do that? Okay, all right, that's better. All right, there we go. Let's go out to that. So I'm going to put that on full screen. I'm going to move you out of the way. What do we mean by mental health? I love this definition of mental health. It's the one issued by the World Health Organization. And why I love it is because it's so incredibly positive. We never talk about mental health as being a good thing. We tend to use it in a very negative way. But actually, when we have good mental health, amazing things happen. we can realize our own potential. We can cope with the normal everyday stresses of life. We can work productively. We can contribute to our families, to our communities, to the people around us. It's a really positive thing to celebrate great mental health. And I want you to hold on to that definition, because I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. The impact of COVID-19, of lockdown, and indeed increasingly of the economic uncertainty that it lies ahead of us, is having a significant impact on people's mental health. And I don't think I even really have to tell you that. But just some of the facts that you can pick up as you look around you on this topic. You know, in 2019, about 5% of the UK workforce worked mainly from home. Today, it's around 60%, and we moved from that situation where most of us were working in offices most of the time to most of us being at home most of the time in just a matter of moments. And at the same time, those that were going out into offices, into workplaces, were facing a really threatening, really difficult environment within which they were working. Work became a place of risk, of unknown threat, whereas maybe before, work was somewhere that you went routinely and always thought of as a kind of safe and friendly place to be. So it's really changed our relationship with work very significantly. The World Health Organization's warning about the known relationship between economic hardship, declining mental health, and indeed the risk of suicide. And a very good article in The Lancet the other week commented on how the pressure of the pandemic is actually reducing people's ability to cope. And hold on to that thought as well, because I'm going to come back to that ability to cope in a moment as well. Calls to the US crisis text line for mental health shout increased from an average of about 750 a day to over 900 a day. And almost half of the calls to the Samaritans are talking in some way about the impact of COVID-19. And while we're all at risk in this situation, there are some individuals who are particularly at risk when it comes to their mental health. Those working on the front line, of course, are in our thoughts all of the time. Young people, individuals who have a condition, a mental health condition or a physical health condition, where the normal things that they used to do to cope with that are much more difficult to access. Maybe, for example, they used to do riding for the disabled, and riding for the disabled is not able to offer that support anymore. That has an impact on those individuals and their families. Maybe you used going out to see friends as a way of coping with your anxiety. Maybe that was your outlet for it. Now you can't go out and see your friends. So that's impacted people's mental health. Those who are isolated, lonely, and parents, particularly single parents, trying to juggle work, childcare, and of course those who are concerned about their financial situation, maybe have already lost their jobs, or indeed maybe are worrying about the risk of losing their jobs. And that has an impact on other employees too, that uncertainty in the workplace and managers actually having to let people go. All of that adds to the mental pressure on individuals. So right now, the kind of surrounding sense of anxiety and discomfort is pretty heavy on us all. I'd love you to go back to Mentimeter again, and I'd love you to answer the next question on Mentimeter, which is, how are you feeling today? So what about this group? How is this group feeling today? And by the way, with Mentimeter, I can't see who is putting in the answers, just in case anyone's worried. It just comes up with a...
Sorry to butt in. I've only just joined late, and I do apologise for that. It's Paul here. How do I get onto this Mentimeter?
So www.menti.com.
Yeah.
And then you put an access code in, 95 88 47, and welcome to the call. Nice to have you here. And it's really interesting looking at your responses on the screen, because your responses on the screen really echo what I have seen when I have looked around the world at what is happening in our workplaces right now. I have a team of about 350 people around the world, and I'm part of a bigger global team of about 2000. And I've been using Mentimeter to kind of get a sense as to how people are doing since almost the very start of the outbreak. And what you're showing on the screen right now with tired right in the middle there is really typical of what I'm seeing today. And around the edge of that tired, you see some very, very different emotions. Some are worried, some are anxious, some are really positive, some are really grateful, some are feeling good today, some are feeling happy today, some are feeling relaxed. But in the middle, the dominant emotion that we're seeing right now is that emotion of feeling tired. As I say, I've been tracking this right since the very beginning. And you can carry on doing that while I just switch back to the screen. I've been tracking that from the very beginning. And this is a Mentimeter from the very beginning of March, about the 14th of March, just at the point when we were really realizing what was happening to us. And you can see here that the word right in the middle was anxious. At the very beginning of the outbreak, anxiety, stress, that sense of real intense feeling of uncertainty was the absolute dominant emotion across the world. And it was really quite extraordinary as I look at the Mentimeters that I've done, how consistently that story has been, whether you're in India, whether you're in Brazil, whether you're in South Africa, whether you're in the UK or the US. That sense of uncertainty and anxiety really, really challenged us right at the beginning. And as we've gone through the outbreak and as people have found some way of settling down, for some people, you can see happy and good and positive coming in. They found a way of making it work for themselves, and they found a way of kind of balancing their emotions and being okay. For others, there's still that big red anxious in there, that sense of being sad, of being overwhelmed. And increasingly, as I've looked at the Mentimeters over the last 3 or 4 weeks, that big word blue tired in the middle, which is what we saw on your own Mentimeters today, is that sense that this has gone on for a long time. We've been sort of managing a lot in our heads, and that's leading to a feeling of being tired. And actually, many people have been working under quite difficult conditions. So that exhaustion that comes when you're constantly balancing things, as well as a lot going on in your mind at the same time. So I think what I really feel when I do these Mentimeters is I get the sense of this absolutely overwhelming sense of how hard it has been for our people to cope right now. And that led me to think about how can you as a leader help to make this a little bit better. And the research that I'm showing you on the slide here came from 2 years of study, the most recent of which was published in November 2019. And what we did in our study in November 2019 was we looked at the differences in how organizations support people when it comes to mental health. So if you imagine that you took a questionnaire, and in that questionnaire it asks you, how does your organization handle mental health? Are you able to be open and feel safe to talk about mental health in your organization? Do you feel it might threaten your career progression, or do you feel that it wouldn't? Lots of questions that give us a measure as to how an individual feels supported when it comes to their mental health. And then we were able to divide our sample into 3. The best, the most supportive organizations, the least supportive organizations, and everybody else. And what that enabled us to do was to look at the difference. How differently do people feel in organizations where their mental health is supported? And that's what you can see on the slide here. So the first thing to point out to you is, if you were in an organization that supports good mental health, actually your likelihood of having a recent mental health challenge goes down. You are 40% less likely, or there are 40% less likely to have a recent history of a mental health challenge. That's a huge impact on individual employees' mental health. And I talked about coping. A lot of what we're hearing about today is how do you cope? How do you cope with the everyday stresses of work? And today we're having to cope with a lot. But in an organization that is supportive of your mental health, you are a lot more likely to feel able to cope with the everyday stresses of work. In the least supportive, 51% said they could cope. In the most supportive, 91% said they could cope. And if you have a mental health challenge already, again, in the supportive organizations, people are much more able to cope at work with the mental health challenges that they have, going from 46% in the less supportive organizations all the way up to 84% in the most supportive organizations. Over and over again, the data shows the difference that having a supportive organisation makes to employees and their ability to cope at work. But what is it about these organisations that's so different from each other? And the one word I pull out to you is the nature of the leaders and how the leaders behave. In these supportive organisations, 88% of employees describe their leaders as warm, human, and open when it comes to mental health. In the less supportive organisations, only 5% said that. You're talking about leaders who are 18 times more likely to give employees that feeling of being supported. So the number one lesson for us, I think, is really to show that you care and to put in place that sense of trust and caring in your organisation. You've got to absolutely demonstrate again and again and again that you care about the health of your employees and your families, and that you put that first. And you have to keep telling them that over and over again as they move through this wave of feelings that they've been experiencing as our pandemic and the situation has moved and evolved in itself. The second thing that I think we need to do is we need to really empower our people as much as we can. If you think about mental health has a lot to do with your sense of control. And we know that if you feel in control of your life, you're more likely to have good mental health outcomes. But what's happened to us over the last sort of 3 months is that a lot of the control we've had over our environment has been taken away. Where we work, how we work, who you can see, how you can shop, even what you can buy. And all of the things that we took for granted and that we were able to kind of have some control over in our lives, suddenly we have no control over anymore. And that has a really negative impact on people's mental well-being. So as employers, we can help because we can empower people where we can. And you can give them a strong message as far as your organisation is able to do, is to let them know that it's okay for them to work how and when they can. I have individuals in my team that are doing 2 hours on, 2 hours off with their partners. So they do the first 2 hours, their partner does the next 2 hours, they do the next 2 hours. I have individuals that are spreading their work over 7 days because right now that's what's working for them. They're not too busy at the weekend doing interesting things, so they'd rather spread their work and have a bit more time with the kids managing things during the week. I have individuals that have moved down to working on a 3-day week. I have individuals that are taking holiday every Friday. If you can let them know that whatever it is that works for them is okay by you and that you trust them, you give them some control back in their lives. Thirdly, knowledge is power. We know from our research that most people have had no training or advice on how to take care of their mental health before they start work. And we as employers can fill that gap. We've been running 1-hour mental health awareness sessions with our teams. We've been running webinars on everything from sleep to financial advice, all the way through this session, trying very hard to help our people get as much information as they can about how to take care of themselves and their families in this situation. One of the things that I would stress to you is coaching people to look out for someone who's withdrawing. Normally when we coach people around mental health, we're kind of looking out for things that have changed. In an organisation where we're all working virtually, I think we're looking for negatives. We're looking for people who kind of drop away, who don't appear on the call, who suddenly stop engaging with us, who aren't visible on video on that conference call where they always have been. We're kind of looking for people who are sort of vanishing. And people who are simply not themselves. And that's one of the messages we've really been trying to kind of get across. And also bearing in mind that in our study, we found that it's the youngest people, those under 25 in your workforce, who are the least likely to open up and tell you that something isn't right when it comes to their mental health. Slightly counterintuitive because we think of the young Gen Zs as being very open about mental health, and they are with their friends and their family. But when it comes into the workplace, they're still establishing themselves, they're still finding their way, and that's holding them back from telling you what is going on. I think the fourth thing we can do is provide as much practical support as we possibly can as organisations. And I see that in really 3 ways. Firstly, guidance on how to work in a healthy way in a virtual world. Secondly, teaching the basics of resilience. And there's some great materials out there. And one of the ones that I really love is 7 Ways to Wellbeing. in our organisation, which is, we're very fortunate in that we are a big organisation, and that does bring with it benefits like having access to things like training. So we do have something we call Thriving Minds, which is training that we rolled out at the very beginning of March, developed with Stanford University and Arianna Huffington's organisation, which is teaching the basics of resilience. But if your organisation doesn't have access to that, things like the 7 Ways to Wellbeing are absolutely outstanding and can really help your people think about how they build their own resilience. And then providing access to professional support, either by signposting to the right places and resources within the National Health Service, organisations like Mind or Mental Health UK, the Samaritans, the WEF and WHO, or it's through your own organisation's provision. And if there's anyone listening in this call, perhaps in a smaller organisation or where you're thinking, actually, we haven't got much of this in place right now, please do go to the Mental Health at Work website. It's a really, really good website where there's a great deal of practical information about how to set up a mental health program, right from the beginning all the way through. And it's got some great advice about COVID there as well. So that's a wonderful resource if you're a smaller organisation or indeed a bigger organisation that's looking to start for the very first time. And I think the fifth of the principles that I would put in place in the workplace right now is the one about thanking and recognising. I find it amazing, literally amazing, as I go around my teams, is that despite everything, actually people are working. They might be in the front line, they might be working in schools, in shops, maybe they're delivering goods or running the transport that we're using, or they're at home, like me today, one eye on the schoolwork or working in shifts with their partners. Some of them are in their bedrooms, in their kitchens. Some of them are surrounded by family. Others are absolutely on their own in a small flat somewhere in the city. But actually, most people are working. And I think that's amazing. And we have to keep recognising and thanking our individuals and just reminding them that this is incredible. You know, somebody said a few weeks ago, we're not working from home, we're working in a crisis from home. And I think that's so important to keep that in mind and keep saying thank you and recognising our individuals and our employees for what they're doing. So let's talk about what's happening now. Let's talk about what's happening as we start to think about the relaxation of lockdown. And again, let me ask you the question, how do you feel about going out to work or to shop as lockdown is relaxed? And we saw it relaxing a great deal over the weekend. There's no doubt about that, with everybody out and about doing more this weekend. So how do you feel about going out to shop or work as the lockdown worlds are relaxed? So using just a bit of Mentimeter again here. Again, I think it's so interesting. You're reflecting very much what I've seen literally across the world over the last week and a half to 2 weeks. There's really almost like a duality of emotion. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see my friends again. I just want to go and do interesting things, but I'm really nervous about it. And I'm really quite apprehensive about it. And actually, there's a bit of me that would actually quite like to just sit here for the next 6 months and not move and not go out anywhere and feel safe. And I think our employees are really sensing that as well. The sense of that word in the middle, brilliant word, uncertainty, feeling cautious, feeling nervous, feeling apprehensive, not wanting to go. And on the other hand, feeling hopeful, feeling excited, that real mix of emotions. And I suspect that many of us feel both of those things. We feel both the excitement and the relief that perhaps maybe we can move back to being a bit more normal, but at the same time feeling really nervous about what that means to us. This on the screen now is one that I did this time just a few days ago with my team. I think it was my team in London, feeling very similar to how you were describing: cautious, anxious, relieved, unsafe, hopeful, scared, skeptical, fearful, happy. Real mix of emotion that people are experiencing. And you can imagine that an individual that is having to walk out of their house or their flat, maybe for the first time, think about getting on a bus or getting on a tube, or perhaps getting on a train and then walking to their office because they don't want to get on the tube, or taking the car and doing a drive that they don't normally do because they don't feel comfortable taking the bus or getting the normal train that they take. That sense of going back to work is something which could be extremely fearful for individuals. And I think we have to keep that really, really in our minds. I think that to make a real difference as we think about how people are coming back to work, and I do love Mentimeter and say to you, it's a great way of finding out how your people in your organization do feel right now at the moment. We're also doing a pulse survey ourselves every 3 weeks to get a sense, and this duality of emotion about coming back to work is really coming out of those surveys as well. But I think what we have to do is, it'd be like right now, we have to double down on our efforts to build trust and to create this culture of openness and support, and to equip people with the knowledge they need. You know, going back to the first of the principles around, you know, supportive organizations and leadership, that supportive environment, if you can create that, we know from our research that you will help people be able to cope in this uncertainty, and you will help those who have a mental health challenge cope better in this uncertainty. We also know that most people don't have that knowledge. So if you can double down on your efforts to build that supportive environment, to give that knowledge right now, then you're going to make a difference to them as they come back to work. You can't expect that if you've not done any of that, that on day one when they get on the bus to come into work, they're going to suddenly trust you and tell you they're not having a good time. We need to build that now, so that as people gradually come back into the workplaces, they're okay about telling you when something isn't going so well. And secondly, that point about empowerment. Empowerment is incredibly important to people. If your organization can, and I know not everyone can, but if there is an element of being able to give your individuals some control over how they return to the workplace, some flexibility to perhaps decide when they come back, or perhaps decide how frequently they come back into the workplace from the very beginning, maybe giving them some sense of being able to choose if you possibly can, that will help them cope. And if you put that in conjunction with the first efforts, then you'll really, really give them a better ability to cope. And be ready. Be ready to support those who find the return more difficult than others, who get to the front door and can't walk through it. And that means really building the understanding of yourselves and of the line managers in your organization, so that you know what to do and how to help someone who's finding that return really, really difficult. So that was all I wanted to talk through. I know you want plenty of time to have questions and to have a bit of a discussion today, so I will pause there and see if you have any questions or any comments, or indeed love to hear what you're all doing and what your thoughts are.
Thank you so much for that, Barbara. It's really fascinating, and it really telling as well that even in our small sample size we've got here today, that we're reflecting what the whole world is thinking. And I really